Will weight loss drugs kill restaurants? Hello, this is Jonathan Mays, editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business. And in this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, we are talking about GLP-1 drugs and their potential impact on restaurant sales. GLP-1 drugs such as Ozempic or Wegovy have been around for a long time to treat type 2 diabetes, but they were recently found to cause weight loss. And some famous people use those medications to lose a lot of weight. And unsurprisingly, the use of them for weight loss has taken off. There is already some evidence that the use of such drugs is changing the way people eat and shop for food at grocery stores, but will it affect restaurants? For this question, we brought in Leo Feler, the chief economist with the consumer insights and data company Numerator. Leo, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Numerator?
Sure. So I come in from a different background. I was a professor at UCLA. I was a professor at Johns Hopkins. I came into Numerator because the data is just absolutely fascinating. So Numerator uses a app called Receipt Hog that we have 150,000 households who are using this on a regular basis to upload receipts. And they're uploading receipts from restaurants. They're uploading receipts from when they go to Walmart trips or a Kroger or an Albertsons or a CVS or a 7-Eleven. We get all of this data and we get a representative view of what consumers are buying in the US. We can then push out surveys that ask, are you taking one of these new GLP-1 medications, commonly known as Ozempic or Wegovy? And with that, we can actually track what these medications are doing to consumer behavior. I joined because when Numerator told me that this data was available, I really couldn't resist the opportunity to get my hands dirty and really play with this data. And so the study that we'll be talking about today is actually a joint collaboration with professors at Cornell University and Numerator, trying to put together all this amazing data plus information on GLP-1 weight loss drugs.
Right. We use Numerator data for any number of things. Actually, it's actually really impressive stuff on a number of things, not just this. And so when I saw that you were on the study, I actually was pretty eager to get you on. So tell us a little bit about the study and what was what were you trying to find?
Sure. So let me tell you a little bit about how it's different than what you normally might consider GLP-1 drugs. One of the things that we've seen at Numerator, when people take these medications, they don't often take them consistently. They're taking them on and off. They're trying these medications. But don't forget, initially, we had huge supply constraints in being able to get Ozempic or Wegovy. These were super popular drugs that people were having a hard time getting, right? Then people might have side effects, and then they stop using these drugs, right? It's very expensive. So oftentimes people will start, but then they don't continue because of the expense. In this study, the study that Numerator did with Cornell, we focused just on the people who are consistently taking these medications, right? We really want to see the effect of what happens when you truly consistently take this medication on your purchasing behavior. And so we actually have about 15% of households have at least one household member taking these medications. But when you then limit it to people who are taking it consistently, you get down to about half of that, right? So 7 to 8%. And the other are, I call them your January gym goers. People who start going to the gym in January, they'll work out for a bit, but they don't continue. And so going to the gym for a month doesn't have that much of an impact on your health. We're trying to weed out all of those people who are using the medications inconsistently so that we can really look at what happens if you are truly taking this medication.
Right. It's a little bit weird to me to imagine a drug that can cost what it costs to people just stop taking it. But so now is you found that it actually has a pretty significant, those who do use it, it does have actually a very statistically significant impact on their purchasing behavior at grocery stores, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw about a 6% decline in all of your grocery purchases for a household that has one member who is consistently using this, right? So you have to kind of put this into perspective. A 6% decline, right, fewer than 10% of households have someone who is consistently taking it. 6% times 10% is 0.6%, right? So it's not a big number when you think about how is this impacting the grocery industry, but it could become a big number as these drugs become easier to take, as they become less expensive, as supply ramps up and these become more widely available. Then you're actually talking about, when you think, what is the share of the population in the US that is obese or moderately overweight, you're getting into like the 40 or 50% range of households that might be taking this drug, or people who might be taking this drug out into the future. We're very far from that. So there's still a lot of time for the food industry, for restaurants to be able to adjust. But we have a vision of what this might look like as these drugs become easier to take and more readily available.
Right. I mean, the issue to me was not that I've always been more concerned about the long-term impact, because I still, and as you noted, I have a hard time believing that a huge percentage of Americans are going to stick themselves with a needle regularly with a very expensive drug to lose weight. But if this starts getting into pill form or some other, you pick whatever vehicle the pharmaceutical industry comes up with these days, I can't keep up with all of them. If you think about, to your point, an easier way of taking it and it becomes cheaper, those are the two things to me. And then it become widespread because a huge percentage of the United States population absolutely could use some of this. And so you could definitely see a statistical impact on sales down the line.
Yep. It's about 6% overall. It gets to about 9% for higher income households, those that earn above $125,000 a year. What's really fascinating is the breakout by categories, right? And this is where we get into like, this makes a lot of sense, right? So one of the categories that sees the biggest decline is chips and salty snacks, right? So everything that you're not really eating at mealtime, you're maybe eating in between meal times just to kind of satisfy a craving. That's the one that has the biggest decline, because this gets rid of a lot of your cravings, right? So it makes total sense that that's one of the areas where we would see a big decline. The second biggest one is sweet bakery items, right? Your donuts, right? Your pastries. Again, these are craving type items, and so you'd expect that they might see big declines. And then on the far other side of the spectrum, where you see some increases, again, not statistically significant, right? So it's a zero in terms of like economic statistics, but you see a positive increase in things like yogurt, fresh produce, meat snacks, nutrition bars. You see increases in all of these items, which kind of makes sense. People are trying to make healthier choices, right? Given that they're cutting back on a bunch of other categories that they're no longer eating.
So they're not buying snack items that they would snack on all day. And they are buying maybe a little bit more healthier items and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But they're reducing their overall spend.
Exactly. They're reducing their overall spend. Don't forget, one of the things that we see, and we didn't really discuss it too much in this paper, but we've done it in other Numerator work. When you look at families with kids where maybe one person is taking this drug, the effect is pretty small. You're still feeding your kids chips and salty snacks, right? You're still feeding your kids, fresh bakery goods, sweet bakery, savory bakery goods. You're still buying these kinds of items, right? Even though you might be the one who is on one of these weight loss drugs. We saw bigger and bigger effects as we got into 2-person households, as we got into 1-person households, because then you really could imagine a fall off in all of these categories, since this is the only person consuming it is the person that is on these weight loss medications.
Well, so now you had some interesting results when you looked at fast food restaurants.
Yeah. So fast food restaurants, we saw a bit of a decline in the morning, right? So people not picking up that coffee or that donut. We saw no effect on lunch. You still have to go eat lunch, right? Like right now I'm in the office, you're in the office, right? I did not bring my lunch from home. I'm still going to go downstairs and buy lunch no matter what, right? I might not snack as much, but I'm still going to go off and buy lunch. And there are other constraints that prevent me from not doing that. And then dinner time, we also saw a big decline, whereas people were taking GLP-1s, stop shopping less during dinner time. And we saw this much kind of across the board, around a 6% decline overall during the hours of 4 to 9 p.m. And again, people can make other choices. They can make healthier choices by eating something at home. Now, the results are never across the board, right? If I were to break out what fast food categories people cut back on and where people increase, the biggest one that people cut back on is pizza, right? Indulgence, right? Maybe less healthy, right? The biggest one that they increase on is going to be your garden salad and your chicken entree, right? Like, again, maybe you are still eating at lunch, right? But you're eating the healthier item. You're making the healthier choice.
So you did see an overall decline, but it really depends on the time of day. So, not at lunch, which is fascinating to me. And one of my guesses is that people that are going out to lunch tend to eat a little bit healthier than they would during other times of day. And that's just personal spec. I don't order pizza at lunch, for the record. Tempting as it might be on occasion, but might be eating healthier because you're in front of other people and stuff like that. Now, there was a breakout though, higher income people were actually more likely to cut out breakfast and lower income people were more likely to cut out dinner. Any speculation about that? That one was interesting to me.
Yeah. This might be that higher income folks are getting their daily Starbucks, right? And that starts getting cut, right? And so if you think about it, you have to have a little bit more disposable income to be able to pick up that daily coffee, right? That daily coffee and that daily pastry. And so if you're starting from a higher base, you have more room to cut. And I think with higher income folks, they have a greater propensity to be going out and spending on these daily breakfast runs. And so there's just more room to cut. For lower income folks, right, now we kind of flip in the other direction. Lower income folks are the ones that might be working longer shifts, working at different times, might have more people in the household who are stretched and working. And so this is a time-saving device to go and get some kind of fast food for dinner. And so they see bigger cuts during the dinner time. And again, they might just be starting from a much higher base because they tend to do this a little bit more often. And so they have more room to be able to cut.
Right. Yeah, that one was interesting. So do you have some recommendations for, restaurants? Is this, first off, actually, let me ask you this way. Is this something that restaurants need to concern themselves with right now? Or is this something that, is just down the line? So I know a number of operators, they don't see it as any sort of issue. But that said, I mean, as far from what I can tell, the amount of prescriptions for GLP-1 drugs just skyrocketed last year.
So we know the effect is coming, right? Is the effect that big right now, right? Like if I take the number for the impact that this has on lower income households, right? It's a 12% decline in going out to fast food restaurants for dinner if you have a member consistently using these medications. Now, again, fewer than 10% of households are consistently using these medications. So 10% times 12% is 1.2%, right? This is not going to break the bank of fast food restaurants and the restaurant industry right now. But you can already start positioning yourself to know, okay, if people are buying less pizza, but they're buying the more chicken entrees, more garden salads, more smoothies, how do I make these items more readily available? And this is the kind of stuff that takes a lot of planning, right? If you're going to be changing the menu at a fast food restaurant, you begin the planning now for what you might be doing in a year, 2 years from now, right? If you also know that people are cutting back on breakfast items, then, this kind of changes your strategy on doing, what's going to be the reward from doing all day breakfast. Or are we going to try to push, in addition to that coffee, right, some kind of egg sandwich? We really are seeing that people who are on these medications are cutting back breakfast entirely, right? So if I put this side by side with what we see from grocery store purchases, the biggest things people are not buying at grocery stores are things that go into breakfast. And they are especially not buying things that are one servings, right? So if you think about one serving breakfasts, it's like maybe that breakfast burrito that you microwave, and then what do you do with the rest of that after you've microwaved it? Or it's that oatmeal cup that you just pour water into, but what do you do with the leftovers of that thing, right? Anything that is single serve, we're seeing people on these medications cut out. And that's because it's not good value for your money if you're not going to eat, half of that thing that you've prepared. And restaurants might want to think about this, which is, people are not able to eat the entirety of a, egg sandwich or a croissant. So what other offering might you be able to provide people that might be more suitable for those on GLP-1 drugs?
So if I serve breakfast, I really have to start thinking of my future yesterday, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Now, I want to put things into perspective because there are other big shifts, right? GLP-1s is one of them. And one of the things that we might think about is, well, what will happen over the course of this coming year, depending on how food prices change, right? Depending on whether food prices might be, or food products might be imported from other countries, depending on the workforce that picks or manufactures certain food products, right? There's a bunch of other things that are also going to affect food prices, including for restaurants. GLP-1s are one of the many factors in play, right? But just something to be aware of, and something that, we don't really know what's going to happen with trade policy and what's going to happen with immigration policy and how that will affect food prices. We kind of have a sense of what's going to happen with GLP-1 drugs over time, given how popular and how helpful these have been for the people who are on these drugs.
So, that's a really good point. So we know, the thing is, like, we have an idea that this is going to happen. I mean, it's going to increase over time. And then once we get some easier delivery mechanisms for these medications, we know what's going to happen. And so operators have time to do it. They can't necessarily predict a war in Asia that, essentially hammers the seafood market, for instance, or, pick your food product, or, fire destroying an entire avocado crop, whatever. So it's just one factor in what might influence sales over time, but they have time to prepare for it.
Yeah. And this is one of the things, one of the things that you can control is what is going to be your offerings related to GLP-1 drugs. There's a bunch of things that you're not going to be able to control in the next 1, 2, 3 years, right? But given that this is a, known trend about how many more people are going on these medications, and it really has taken off, right? It's something that you can react to and start planning for right now.
Right. That's interesting. Leo, this was fantastic. I really appreciate you joining me this week on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, fantastic. And that should do it for this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, which was edited, as always, by Spoons. Artwork by Nico Hines. You may find this and other episodes of the podcast on our website at www.restaurantbusinessonline.com/article/deeper-dive. And you may subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Jonathan Mays, your host, podcast producer, and the editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business. Thank you for listening.